Hey, it's Javi from OmniProps, and today I've been hearing a lot of people asking, how do you get into prop and costume making? It can be pretty daunting when you first glance at it. Hey, but no fret. Today, we're going to be showing you how to make your very own first prop, a Tonto blade. Very iconic blade, actually pretty simple to do, and we're going to be showing you step by step on how to create this thing. Let's get to crafting.
Alright, so we're going to get started with this project. First thing you would need is some 10mm EVA foam. Any high temp hot glue gun and get some glue sticks with that. A metal straight edge. A paintbrush or a sponge brush. Some smaller brushes for details. A craft blade, I use 9mm snap blades. A thin wooden dowel. Any acrylic paint colors of your choosing. And I use some silver acrylic paint for the blade. Some Mod Podge, some twine or ribbon for the details on the handle, metal paper fasteners, some gloves, something to paint on, a plastic baggie works just as well, and lastly some Kwik Seal. Alright, so firstly we are going to cut these blades out. So you want to make sure you stand up so you can get a nice straight arm, and using that straight edge with your craft knife, you're going to simply just cut these blades out. Now, you want to make sure that your blades are very sharp because sometimes you might need to take a couple cuts here and there just to get that nice finish on the edges. But once you do that, you should have 2 blades cut out. Next is replace that craft blade because you're going to have to make a nice sharp cut once again. But this time we're doing a 45-degree angle cut. So right on the tip of the blade and right on the edge, you're going to want to angle that knife so it's a nice 45-degree edge. So we just did the tip, so now we're going to do the edge of the blade. Make sure you pay attention to where your fingers are. We don't want to cut your fingers. And you might need to cut off just the corner edge there, saw it off, because that's kind of an awkward angle to get that 45-degree cut. Next, you're going to want to use your 9-inch dowel, and we are actually going to use this to imprint the actual shape of the dowel onto the backs of the blades. You want to do this on both sides, and you are going to use your pen to actually just trace out that indentation onto the foam. The next step is going to be doing the V-cut. Now this is actually just another 45-degree angle cut, but it's a little bit different. You're not going to cut all the way, you're just going to be cutting halfway through the foam. So utilizing those lines that we drew earlier, you're going to use that as your tracing guide to cut your 45-degree angle. You're essentially going to try to meet those 2 cuts together through the middle of the foam and peel off the excess so you're able to place your wooden dowel in that groove, glue it up, and add some structure for your blade. So here you see me basically putting this into practice. I have a fresh new blade and I am just cutting the lines at a 45-degree angle cut on both sides. My goal is to try to meet those cuts right down the middle of the blade. Again, not cutting all the way through, but just enough so that I'm able to actually peel off the foam and reveal a nice groove deep enough for the wooden dowel to be placed in. I just used my hot glue gun, not too much glue, and just placed my dowel between the grooves. And obviously you're going to want to doing the same cut on the other blade, and once you do that, you'll be able to just hot glue the 2 pieces together like a sandwich. Now you just want to make sure you also really get the hot glue on the edges, but don't make too many big blobs. But there you go, now you have pretty much a blade. If you have any excess foam sticking out, you can simply just trim it off with your blade, and if you have any uneven or rough cuts, we can actually fix that with some Kwik Seal. Now to Kwik Seal your blade, you want to make sure you take precautions. You want to make sure you wear a glove and have a nice open area because the stuff can get a little stinky. The Kwik Seal is essentially there to hide your mistakes. You want to make sure you have your finger wet so you can smooth out the Kwik Seal all around the blade. So that main seam that you see around the blade, you want to cover it up with some Kwik Seal. I give it about an hour or so to dry, but for best results, I would actually wait overnight, let it sit, and I would actually get some sandpaper and sand it down even if you have that available. Next, I just drew a line where you see here to add some sort of separation from the blade and the handle. Then, for my personal blade, I decided to make it out of wood grain. And wood grain is super fun because it's supposed to be not correct. There's lots of grooves, there's lots of knots. you basically have fun with it. You can make it just a simple black handle and that's totally fine. But for this instance, I want to do a wood grain. So think of how a wood pattern would look like. Do this on all 4 sides of the handle and just trace it out. You don't have to be exactly how I have it here. Now, what you see me doing here is something called scoring. Now, the premise of scoring is actually quite simple. You just use the tip of your blade, and you are just gonna pretty much go over all the lines that you just drew. Now, again, this is totally optional, but for me, since I want to do a wood grain effect, this is basically the first step of a 2-step process to make foam look like wood. So the second step to this magical process is using a heat gun or a blow dryer, but it will take a little bit longer. You essentially just going to be heating up the handle, but you don't want to get too close because you don't want to burn the foam. But heat essentially will make the foam expand, allowing the handle to really have that wood grain effect. Now, sometimes it might not really show up that well, so you just might need to peel up the foam a little bit to help it out, get that 3-dimensional effect. To seal the blade, we are going to be using Mod Podge. So I just use my plastic bag as my little paint palette, and using a sponge brush, since it doesn't have any bristles, it will actually achieve a little bit better of a paint effect, so there won't be that many lines. So you're just going to be coating the entire blade and handle with Mod Podge. You probably might want to do a layer or 2 of this stuff and give it a couple hours to dry, and always overnight will give you a nice best effect for adhesion and dry. But it's very important to know that once you seal the handle, you're basically covering your grooves you worked so hard on. So you want to make sure you actually, with your X-Acto blade, you just retrace those grooves so we are able to paint inside the grooves later on. Now, with your paper fasteners, you would need to possibly trim them if you have them just a little bit long. They always come in different sizes, but in this case I had to trim it so just about a 1/4 inch, and where those dots are on your handle, that's where they're gonna go. And my rivets weren't too sharp, so I just used a pencil to make the holes a little bit deeper. And once I found a good spot for them to rest in, I just used some hot glue and I just dabbed it in there, and so that will be nice and secure. And of course, you want to be doing this on both sides for a total of 4 rivets. Now for the fun part, painting. So for any paint job, you always want to start with a base coat. I like to just use, for this case, black acrylic paint, and you would just paint the entire handle and blade black. You might want to do a layer or 2 of this, and for the handle specifically, you really want to make sure you get into those grooves. You'll see why in a little bit, and try to avoid the rivets unless you want to be painted black. Now we're going to start with the handle. I'm going to be using just a brown paint, and almost as if I'm dry brushing, meaning I don't have a lot of paint on my brush at the time of painting, I'm just going to be using the flat edge of the paintbrush and just lightly coat the handle. You really want to avoid the black grooves like we mentioned earlier, and if you do get some brown paint, no sweat. All you need to do is just get a very fine paintbrush and just go over it with some black acrylic paint. Now for my personal favorite part of any project, weathering. So since I decided to do a darker brown color for the handle, I'm using a lighter brown color. And dry brushing, which I just explained recently, is the act of barely having any paint on your paintbrush and using the flat end of your paintbrush and just ever so lightly just brushing the whatever you're brushing on. In this case, we're doing the edges, so I'm just barely going over the edges. Really think about, if you were a character in this world, where would the wood get most abused? Definitely the butt of the handle would get torn up. Definitely the grooves, all those knots will start getting some discoloration. So this is really your chance to have fun with it. You don't have to do exactly how I have it here. And I'm just adding some more highlights just to really have those grooves pop up. blade itself, I'm using some metallic acrylic paint. Now this paint does take a little bit longer to dry and get a little tacky, so I did about 2 to 3 layers of this over a few hours. But having 2 layers to 3 really shows that silver metallic pop up, and having that black base coat really helps the silver look as shiny as it should. Now your blade is totally finished if you wanted to stop here, but if you just want to add a little bit more character, you can always use some of that twine I mentioned in the earlier video, or some ribbon, or whatever you want, and just glue it onto the handle. You can just glue it from the bottom of the handle, wrap it around, and glue it in the bottom once again, and there you have it. You got your own little dagger.
And there you have it, your very own Tonto blade in your hands. Now this build was such fun to make. When it comes to the blade shape, the paint job, or even the handle, there's always room for creativity, and the best part, there's always room for improvement. This blade is honestly a really good exercise for new and experienced prop makers and cosplayers. Such as myself, I'm pretty experienced in this stuff, but I find myself thinking, maybe I could have made like a Damascus style on this blade, or maybe I could have done something different with the wraps. This is an amazing basic exercise to really get my creative juices flowing in my head, and honestly it's kind of refreshing from comparing to make crazy elaborate props and cosplays. But if you did build this alongside the video, fantastic job by the way. We'd love to see it on our socials. If you want to tag and like and all that jazz, we would love to see it and spread the word, because as a creative artist such as yourself, you deserve that. But if you have any specific questions, or even struggle on some bits like the 45-degree angle cut or the specific intricacies of the handle, we'd love to help you out even further. If you just want to shoot us a DM on Twitter or Instagram, or even on my website, I would love to go over specifically on, hey, maybe you should have probably done it this way, or have you considered using a different paint style? There's many ways that I would love to help, because that's what we do here at OmniProps. We love to share our creativity and help the community just become more creative, because I know everyone has just a little bit of that creative juices in their head. And thank you again for watching this video, and as always, thank you to continue to forge fantasy into reality. Take care.